Hiya, Derek here. This video will be on the Oxford comma, and by the end of the video, I promise you, you will not only understand and recognize and use the Oxford comma properly, but you also will be able to explain it to other people. Because I think if you understand it, it's far more better than having to remember it. And if you're having trouble explaining it, just send the people to this video. Now, there's an awful lot of nonsense about the Oxford comma out in the interwebs. And the reason I know this is because when I said to ChatGPT, just as a test for something different, I said, please explain the Oxford comma. It made such a balls up of it that it's just not funny. And of course, ChatGPT doesn't know anything. It just aggregates the source material it has. And so this tells me that there's a lot of nonsense. And we need to, before we go on to the Oxford comma, we need to look at a couple of other seemingly unrelated things first. But like I say, I promise it will all make sense in the end. And the first thing we need to look at is the different ways in which UK English, or sometimes it's called English, and US English handles lists. And you'll see here that in UK, and again, I'll call it UK English, although it's actually unnecessary, just to make it really clear which one we're talking about. So I'm suffering for your learning. So in UK English, we don't have a comma before the and or at the end of the list. And in US English, there is a comma. This becomes relevant later. And as you can see from the example, probably here somewhere, yep. There's a comma before the and in American English, which isn't in English or UK English. And the first thing we need to point out is that this is not the Oxford comma. Now, there are quite a few people out there, some of which who really should know better, who will say, and that's the Oxford comma. No, it's not. But you'll see why they might think that at the end. But just to be really clear, the US standard of adding a comma before the end of the and or of a list is not the Oxford comma. Let's get that out of the way before we carry on. And the other thing we need to look at is so-called restrictive and non-restrictive clauses, or sometimes called essential and non-essential clauses. Now, this sounds horribly complicated, but it's just a name they give to something that's actually fairly simple. And if we take an example to show the difference, it will become clear. So if I have, say, one sister, and she lives in London and has 2 kids, and I'm telling you something like this, I could say, my sister, then comma, who lives in London, comma, has 2 children. And the information between the commas, the fact that she lives in London, is a so-called non-restrictive clause, because it's just extra information that is not necessary. And if we were to leave it out, it would still make sense. Namely, my sister my sister has 2 kids. Now, if I have more than one sister, and one lives in London, and one lives in Paris, and one lives in Rome, just an example, then the information who lives in London is no longer like a little bit of extra information that could be omitted. It's actually important to know exactly who I'm talking about. And in this case, we don't use commas. We say, my sister who lives in London has 2 children. And that is then clear because I mean the one in London, not the one somewhere else or somewhere else again. And so this, with the commas around it, is a so-called non-restrictive clause. In other words, a bit of extra information that's not necessary. And without the commas, it then becomes sort of a necessary piece of information to help you understand what I'm talking about. So having got those out of the way, we can now look at the Oxford comma. Now, you might have heard people, or you might have had some inkling about the Oxford comma. You heard something about, oh, well, it gives you information about how many people, or it's to do with the numbers of people. And if we take an example sentence, you could say, we invited our neighbors, say William and Barbara, or call them Bill and Babs. So we invited our neighbors, Bill and Babs, to the party. And you think, well, okay, are our neighbors called Bill and Babs, or is it the neighbors who we don't know plus? But we don't need to worry about this in this example because the commas give us everything we need to know. So if we asked our neighbors, comma, Bill and Babs, comma, to the party, and we invited our neighbors, Bill and Babs, to the party, the fact that Bill and Babs is in commas tells us that it's a bit of extra information that's not necessary. So in this case, we can infer that we only have one neighbor, but maybe we live somewhere a bit remote. We have one neighbor or one house next door or nearby, and they are owned by Bill and Babs, and we invited them to a party. And so we invited our neighbor, comma, Bill and Babs, comma, to the party. No confusion here, no sort of, everything is clear. Now, if we have no commas at all, we invited our neighbors, Bill and Babs, to the party, then that is also clear because we have more than one neighbor in this case, and I mean specifically those neighbors, Bill and Babs. And if it's unnamed neighbors plus Bill plus Babs, who maybe work colleagues, then it would be we invited our neighbors, comma, Bill and Babs, no comma, to the party. And in that's the UK version. And in US English, it would be we invited our neighbors, comma, Bill, comma, and Babs to the party. And so you can see in these three examples how sort of the US and UK English, although slightly different, it's still clear what the situation is. Now, here's where the Oxford comma comes in. If we miss the bit at the end about to the party, just say we invited our neighbors, Bill and Babs. So what happens in US English, we'll do this first, is we invited our neighbors, Bill and Babs, so no comma. Okay, that's very clear. We have more than one neighbor, and we mean Bill and Babs. So we invited our neighbors, Bill and Babs, full stop. If we're talking about a list of people, so it's our neighbors, unnamed plus Bill plus Babs, we have invited our neighbors, comma, Bill, comma, and Babs, again clear. And if we have in US English, we invited our neighbors, comma, Bill and Babs, then that's clear. We have one neighbor and the neighbors are called Bill and Babs. Again, that's all clear. The problem comes when we look at the UK version. So we look at the version first, where we have two people called Bill and Babs who are neighbors, and we take off the to the party. So we invited our neighbors, Bill and Babs is clear. Two people, Bill and Babs, they're neighbors, and I don't mean specifically those neighbors. But the trouble comes with the other two situations. So if we have the example with the non-restrictive clause, where we have the commas around Bill and Babs, so we show it, we only got one neighbor and it's them, it's just extra information. If we take the to the party bit away, we end up with we invite our neighbors, comma, Bill and Babs, comma, full stop. And we never end a sentence with comma, full stop, and I don't think any variants of English, and so we just take the comma away because it's seen as unnecessary. And then we have the list version. We invited our neighbors, comma, Bill and Babs to the party, and we leave the to the party away, and that also then is the same. And this is a problem because in the UK version, we don't know. With this example, we invited our neighbors, Bill and Babs. Is it 4 people or 2 people? Are the neighbors called Bill and Babs? Or is it our neighbors who aren't named plus Bill plus Babs? And if you look at the UK version, they are the same. And this is the problem we have. And so to get around this specific problem, in UK English, we break the rule about not having a comma before the and we put a comma before the and to make it clear that that's the case with 4 people. And that is the Oxford comma. Now you can see why people think that the American comma standard or convention that they use is the Oxford comma, because in this example it looks the same, but it is not. Okay, the American convention of adding a comma before that and is not the Oxford comma. That's too general. It's not specific enough for the situation we've just shown. So now you know the Oxford comma, you know where it comes from, why it is the way it is. You've seen the example that shows the problem. If any of this was too quick, please go back and just watch it again. And if it's still not clear, just ask a question, you'll get an answer. Anyway, I hope that clears up once and for all the Oxford comma. ChatGPT, please look at this. Now you know as well, and hopefully we can put this silly topic to bed. Till next time, bye for now.